Hey, good afternoon to you. 5:06 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Coming up, former speechwriter for President Ronald Reagan, Clark Judge, joins us. We'll get his take on this century's State of the Union addresses, in particular the one we heard last night. What does he think of that one? Here's a piece of it last night. Joe Biden saying the economy is doing great.
And by the way, the first couple of years, we cut the deficit. Now, let me speak to the question of fundamental fairness for all Americans. I've been delivering real results in fiscally responsible ways. We've already cut the federal deficit. We've already cut the federal deficit over $1 trillion. I signed the bipartisan deal to cut another $1 trillion in the next decade. It's my goal to cut the federal deficit another $3 trillion by making big corporations and very wealthy finally beginning to pay their fair share.
There you go. You heard him say it right there. He's got the deficit right there. For more on this, we bring in EJ Antoni. He's the economist at the Heritage Foundation, the in-house economist at the Vince Coglianese Show. EJ, good to have you back with us, sir.
Vince, you know how I feel about you playing clips of that clown right before I come on.
I know. That's why I do it, specifically to get you really mad about it. So he says that he cut the deficit, that everything's great with the budget now in the government. What does it actually look like at the moment?
Oh my gosh, it's an absolute disaster. We're borrowing at a rate of $3 trillion a year. Please explain to me how that's cutting the deficit. The great irony here is that, and this is something we've talked about before, if Biden had literally done nothing, absolutely nothing, just allowed all the temporary one-time COVID emergency measures to expire and not replace them with additional spending, we'd actually have a balanced budget today. I mean, it's an absolute just joke that he can get up there and assert that he has cut the deficit.
And if I understand correctly, he's still relying on the same old shell game, which is that they didn't release yet another tranche of COVID spending, and so they'd like credit for not doing that?
Exactly. And like you said, it's nothing more than a shell game. But look, the fact is we've borrowed $1.3 trillion just in the first 5 months of this fiscal year that just ended with the end of February. So again, the idea that somehow we are on a fiscally sustainable path, where things are improving, it's all absolute garbage. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't like using this word with politicians, but it's true in this case. He's lying.
For sure. So one of the talking points the White House has been pushing this week is that it's time to tackle something called shrinkflation. And they say American corporations are shrinking the sizes of the products that we buy, and then trying to convince us that we're getting just as much as we got before. In reality, they're just robbing us of money, those greedy corporations. What is actually going on there? Joe Biden talked about Snickers bars last night.
I would love to know, Vince, how corporations magically all became greedy at the same time in January of 2021. Or, gee, maybe there was something else that happened around that time that caused prices to go up so much. Look, at the end of the day, his administration's own numbers actually disprove this narrative, because according to the data published by the Biden administration, prices that you and I and consumers pay and prices that businesses pay have both gone up on average 18%. In other words, all of the higher costs that businesses have been facing, they're simply passing along to customers. In fact, it was literally only a couple of months ago that the price increases you and I and the audience are paying actually got high enough that they matched the increased prices that businesses were already paying and had been for months. So corporations, mostly to try to maintain market share, for a long time they were actually shielding customers from cost increases. So if businesses are being greedy, they're doing it wrong.
Another piece of last night's address was he said that he wanted to figure out a way, he was going to use the government to compel the credit card companies to cut their fees so that people don't have to pay as much in fees to the credit card companies. Now, I laughed at that for a number of reasons. Like, one is, like, no matter, whenever the government interferes, like, these companies usually figure out a different way to get the money out of you, for one. Two, Biden has been like the most loyal little lobbyist for the credit card companies his entire political career. He's from Delaware. That's where all the credit card companies are. He's been sucking up to them. He's done everything he can to enrich those companies. What do you make of his chatter going on about these credit card companies right now?
Oh, Vince, you make such a great point there that a lot of people just forget, unfortunately, about Biden's history. But I mean, what is he actually trying to do? He's trying to score political points because the math doesn't add up in terms of what he says he's trying to do and the actual effects of the policies that he wants to implement. At the end of the day, people need to remember credit card debt is an unsecured loan, which means if I walk away from it, the credit card company has very little, they have very few ways of actually collecting on that debt. They typically sell it for around 5 cents on the dollar to a collection agency. So that's one of the reasons why interest rates on credit cards have to be so high and why fees have to be so high. Because if you start capping that, what happens? The high risk debtor is no longer worth doing business with. Why? Because as soon as a couple of them default, you aren't going to make up enough in terms of interest and in terms of fees on the rest of them in order to make that group profitable. So what's the result? You simply deny credit to all of them. So unless you are a member of the wealthy political donor class, and there's very little chance that you're ever going to default on your debt, unless you're one of those people, congratulations, it's going to be a lot harder for you to get credit under Joe Biden.
Right. And the reason why credit cards are such a present and looming thought in the minds of the American people right now, I would imagine, is because so many people have credit card debt. I mean, we've talked now for months that a while ago we topped over $1 trillion in credit card debt here in the United States. Is that number still climbing?
It is. We're up to 1.13 and still going higher. And the crazy thing is, Vince, that is happening at a time when the interest rate on those credit cards is also at a record high. So American families right now are paying over $240 billion a year in interest just on their credit cards. Now, how on earth did we get into this, such a mess? It was all because, again, going back to what we started this with, Biden just had to spend all of that money. And what did that do? It gave us 40-year high inflation. And then to belatedly fight that inflation, the Federal Reserve had to hike interest rates hard and fast. So all of that inflation meant people lost purchasing power in terms of what their money could actually buy. So they had to go into debt to sustain their standard of living, their quality of life. They racked up all this debt, and now the interest has gone through the roof. And now the interest payments on that credit card debt is starting to bankrupt people.
Okay, so let me just take this full circle then. So as you point out, it's government spending, it's the Federal Reserve, it's the printing of the money, all of that inflation comes. People can't afford their lives, they get the credit cards, they get a ton of debt, the interest payments go up, their payments go up, and now they're suffering. And so Biden's policy now is the government is going to step in and lower your credit card fees, your credit card late fees in particular, he's been talking about lately. What does that do to the economy if the government tries to get its hands involved in that part of the process?
Oh yes, because the thing that I'm really upset about right now is not the fact that I'm spending twice as much on consumer staples like bread. Oh no, it's the fact that I pay $20 instead of $8 a month in terms of late fees on my credit card. Give me a break. This is going to do absolutely nothing to actually help the average American family. But what it is going to do is it's going to prevent a lot of families from having access to credit cards.
Right.
And when emergencies come around, because today literally most families in America do not have savings with which to meet any kind of emergency, like let's say your refrigerator dies, you need to buy a new one. So they all have to use credit cards in order to finance that. Okay, well now a lot of those people are going to lose access to credit because the banks are going to decide it's not worth doing business with these people.
And when you say most, what you're talking about is most people. I've seen surveys on this before. Like more than 50% of Americans don't have $1,000 available to them for an emergency.
Exactly. In fact, the bottom quintile doesn't have any savings at all. We talk about how people have excess savings from the pandemic, right? When the government was cutting everybody checks. And, as you've talked about, Biden had that speech in where was it? Delaware, I think, or no, I'm sorry, it was Baltimore, Port of Baltimore.
Yes.
Where he was talking about how, we sent checks to people and then they had nothing to spend it on or whatever. And that caused inflation. Well, what happened when you gave all that money to people? A lot of people just socked it away for a rainy day. That rainy day has come, and it's been here a while. And a lot of Americans have spent that plus the savings they had before the pandemic. They have nothing left. Now all they have is debt.
Big time. All right, let me move from the speech to today's economic data because I think it gives us some more perspective. I saw that the press was running with a bunch of headlines this morning that the economy is humming along, that it's doing great. But they also said in the very same headline that unemployment is ticking up. How can you say the economy is doing great and unemployment is going up? How does that work?
Well, it doesn't, is the short answer. You know, a lot of people don't understand that the headline jobs number that we always hear about is from one survey that the BLS has, and then the other number, the unemployment rate, that comes from a totally different survey. And what we saw in the establishment survey, the survey of businesses, is that the number of payrolls increased. But then if you look at the survey where we get the unemployment rate from, that shows employment dropping. In fact, it has for a while. One of the really crazy things that no one has a good explanation for right now is no one in the administration, I should say, is the fact that the survey of households continues to be depressed while the survey of businesses keeps going up. So one has a 275,000 increase for the month of February. The other has a 184,000 decrease. And if you look at that survey of households, what you see is there's been no net increase in jobs going all the way back to April of 2023 of last year. So almost an entire year, we've essentially created no jobs. Now, how on earth is that possible? One key reason is the fact that every time someone goes out and gets a second job, or even, God forbid, they have to get a third job, they get counted again in those payroll numbers. And so you don't necessarily have to increase the number of people employed to increase the job numbers. And that's exactly what we've been seeing.
And then what we've also saw is that they revised January down again, that we actually had way fewer jobs than the rosy January report told us.
Oh, exactly. And I mean, this has just become a joke at this point. Every single month gets revised down the following month. And the problem there is that, you know, like, for example, in the month of February, over 60% of the jobs that were in that headline were jobs we thought we already had. So how well is the economy actually doing if month after month you are constantly simply adding jobs, again, that you thought you already had? That's been the case for 12 of the last 14 months. I mean, maybe something is going on that's nefarious at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, maybe not. All I know is that there is something seriously wrong with their methodology today, and they owe an explanation to everyone who relies on this data as to what is going on and how they're going to fix it. That's Congress, that's the American people, and that's also the Fed, who's basing their interest rate decisions allegedly on this data.
But what are the odds the government could keep estimating that we have hundreds of thousands of jobs more than we actually do each month and then revise it down? Like, what is the likeliness that the report keeps coming out in that direction?
Oh, it's zero. And that's why I say there's something seriously wrong with the methodology at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Now, maybe there is something untoward going on. I don't know. But at the end of the day, we have seen stuff like this happen before, and it typically occurs during a recession, because what's happening is there are components of the economy that are changing right under the nose of the BLS, and they are not adapting their methodology to those changes. And so it's very much garbage in and garbage out. So in 2009, for example, they had to revise down quite severely their job estimates. So even though they were saying, okay, jobs are dropping, it turns out when they did the revisions, jobs dropped much, much further.
Finally, I think there's a blaring alarm on the next piece of data I want to ask you about. I saw you tweeting today that all of the new jobs that we've had, I think if I remember correctly, since before the pandemic, all of the new jobs created in America have gone to foreign-born workers, and that native-born American workers have actually lost jobs since that time frame?
Yes. Oh, Vince, I'm so glad you brought this up. I think this is a key reason why the polling can continue to be so terrible for Biden in terms of how he's handling the economy, and yet we can continue to have these quote-unquote blockbuster jobs reports. It's the fact that Americans aren't happy with the economy because they're not the ones getting the jobs. If you look at native-born versus foreign-born employment, not only are our native-born Americans below their pre-pandemic trend by several million, they're 1 million below the pre-pandemic level. So like you said, they've lost ground over the last 4 years. But what about foreign-born? Well, foreign-born workers, they months ago returned to their pre-pandemic trend. They're now 3.3 million above the level from February of 2020. So again, all of the new jobs on net in the last 4 years have all gone to foreign-born workers. At the end of the day, Americans are being left behind here.
This is one of the most critical stories of our era, and almost nobody is telling it. EJ Antoni, thank you for being all over the data, as always. Really appreciate your time today, sir.
Vince, always a pleasure.
All right, let's go to the phones. I've got Mark calling in. Woodbridge, line 1. Mark, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hello, sir.
Hey, thank you, Vince. Great show like usual. Hey, State of the Union. I live in the United States. I heard him talk about Ukraine and Gaza. And, okay, I don't even want to go over the domestic problems, but I know you'll explain them. And then on top of that, I had a question, State of the Union, do they serve a good prime rib? I'm a prime rib lover.
Where do you go for your prime rib usually, Mark?
Actually, every place I go, I go to the fast food places, Texas Roadhouse, stuff like that, and they never have it. They never have it.
Are you a horseradish guy?
No, I've never tried horseradish on it. I like.
Oh, you're missing out. I like. Some people like the raw horseradish. I'm a creamy horseradish guy with my prime rib. No, not at Bourbon Boulevard. At least it's not on the menu just yet. Although they do add a ton of stuff to the menu there. Their big thing is all their dry aged steaks, the tomahawks and the fillets and the New York strips. They're fantastic. But I like a good prime rib every now and then myself, Mark. I'm right there with you. Thanks for the call. Yeah, no, you're totally right. Biden was talking a lot more about other people's countries instead of America. The kind of place where you can get a good prime rib. America. Hey, coming up, we're going to talk to Ronald Reagan, speechwriter, a guy who was also an assistant to Vice President George Bush at the time. Clark Judge will be with us. We'll talk about the dark tone of this president's speech last night.
The threat to democracy must be defended. My predecessor and some of you here seek to bury the truth about January 6th. I will not do that. This is the moment to speak the truth and to bury the lies. Here's the simple truth. You can't love your country only when you win.
Yeah, sometimes presidential rhetoric is soaring. Last night, Joe Biden bottomed out over and over and over again. A dark speech from the President of the United States in a State of the Union, attacking his top political opponent over and over without even saying his name. For more on what he heard last night, I want to turn to an expert on this subject. He's the founder and managing director of the White House Writers Group and a former speechwriter and special assistant to both President Ronald Reagan and Vice President George Bush. Clark Judge joins us now on the phone. Clark, good to have you with us, sir. Thank you very much.
Good to be here.
What did you make of the tone of that State of the Union address?
Angry, self-righteous, low shots, negative, divisive. Do you want me to keep going? This was a president who doesn't know how to bring people together. I kept thinking in this about one of President Trump's, amazingly, one of President Trump's State of the Union addresses, where he had this angry audience on the Democrat side joining the Republicans in singing happy birthday to a Holocaust survivor. And another where he had the whole House in second State of the Union had the whole House in cheering within seconds of his of starting when he invoked Israel and something going on there. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of performance that's unifying. Last night was the kind of performance, low shots. Henry Kissinger said of the way the Afghan retreat was handled that it was callous. That's everything that Biden does seems to be callous, have an edge of callousness.
You know, I'm ashamed to say that I had forgotten about so many of the great moments of the Trump States of the Union. He was very good at the theater of this moment. And I mean that by way of a compliment. You know, I remember in particular, there was a Navy SEAL by the name of Ryan Owens who had died early in Trump's presidency. And he brought his widow, Karen Owens, up as a guest. And he cited her and talked about his great service to the country. And her tears ran down her face, and the whole country was captivated by that moment, by her prayerfulness, by her looking up to the heavens to almost acknowledge her husband in the room. And I remember there was another moment where Trump brought in a man who had fled North Korea, and in the process had basically lost the ability to use his legs, and he raised his crutches in victory from the top of that deck. Right. And it just these amazing moments, and that we didn't get anything like that last night out of Joe Biden.
No. The Trump, I know this runs counter to the way a lot of people think of him, but if you think back on those State of the Union addresses, they had tremendous amount of humanity in them. There was no humanity last night. There was just anger and bitterness, and you know, if something goes wrong, the border. Whose fault is the border? The other guy's fault.
Yes.
Whose fault is inflation? The other guy's fault. You know, that's not leadership. That's the very opposite of leadership.
So in your experience in presidential speech writing, what distinguishes a State of the Union from other presidential addresses? Is there something unique about that event?
Well, there's several things. First is you have the whole country watching. It's a time when you're laying out, ideally, your view of the future of the country, the next year, the years after that. So it should be a forward-looking address. It should be looking towards what we can do and what we can do together. You look at Ronald Reagan's addresses. They were all like that. You look at the two Bush's addresses. They were like that. You know, this address was all looking back in anger. That's not leadership.
The phrase union seems important here, too. The state of our union, in other words, suggesting that we are all on a part of a shared mission, is normally how you might view this. But that's not the message I got from Biden last night. Biden very clearly was establishing a line of demarcation between himself and his party and everybody else, and kind of setting battle lines.
Right. The Democrats started that last night, even before it was orchestrated. Even before he gets to the podium, they're cheering 4 more years. Now, that's not really appropriate for a State of the Union address, but every single Democrat in Congress seems to have had that have been prompted to do that cheer. And again, there was very much a "we're going to get you guys" attitude from the Democrats all through the evening.
Last night,
I'll tell you the contrast. The contrast to that is the woman, Senator Britt, Katie Britt, who gave her response. That was one of the best speeches I've seen of any kind in State of the Union time. There's only one speech reply to a State of the Union that ever upstaged before this last night, that ever upstaged the president himself, and that was when Robert Dole put up a chart about the bureaucracy that would come up on Clinton care, and it swept it dominated the news the next day.
Well,
Katie Britt's speech last night was worthy of being the prime speech of the evening, not the follow-on.
How about that? So, Clark Judge, you must not be an internet user, or at least a frequent one, because everybody on the internet hated the Katie Britt speech last night. They're very judgmental of her emotionality and the way she was talking. They thought she was too theatrical. You thought, given that this has been your business, the business of speechwriting, you thought she had a great speech.
I thought she was brilliant, and I thought the text was brilliant. It was a real critique, but it was also a hopeful one.
Yeah.
And this is in contrast to what we had seen earlier in the evening.
Yeah, for sure. When Joe Biden attacked the Supreme Court justices yesterday as nothing more than just political operatives who seem to be working against his agenda, Is that something that you would expect other presidents to ever do, where they stand up there and they would attack?
The only one who's ever done it is Barack Obama when he attacked them over a bill, a decision or a pending decision. He basically was trying to intimidate them. President Biden opened his speech last night talking about freedom, democracy, and saying basically directly anybody who disagrees with him is an enemy to freedom and democracy. But then he goes to attack the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court as a whole, shortly after they've made the Trump decision, which was done unanimously. So while you could say, well, he was doing some other things like with abortion, which was not a unanimous decision, of course. What he was doing was attacking the institution. Every single justice he was attacking. And that's a president who's got visions of being able to break out of the checks and balances of the Constitution. And he's shown a lot of signs of that. He's done a lot of that. The ways handle student loans, and the list goes. There's a long list. I won't go into it now.
It's a big one.
We all know there's a long list.
and he's routinely dismissive, in fact, of the Supreme Court when it calls him out for unconstitutionality. The same was true, of course, in the moratorium that he imposed on people paying rent to their landlords. He said people didn't have to pay rent to their landlords, and the Supreme Court says that's unconstitutional. People have to fulfill their contracts. People need to get the money that they're owed. And he said, well, it doesn't matter. Just keep doing it anyway. And that's his attitude towards the Supreme Court. And he has the temerity to stand up there and lecture the rest of us about democracy.
That's right. He is making himself an enemy of democracy.
Yeah,
and I'm sorry to say this, but I think some of the attacks, we all know how how the talk about freedom and democracy started with the way they've characterized the riot on
January 6th.
January, but he has seized on that to use as a cover for his own attacks on freedom and democracy, which are much more. The January 6th was a bunch of stupid people making us rioting, and this.
It's been used as a predicate for tyranny, though, ever since.
That's right.
And it's a deeply, deeply disturbing. It must.
That's
do
right.
you ever look at what it takes? Obviously, every president's going to be different, writing a speech for them and get them so that they can actually deliver it and sound credible. It's got to be a weird experience, I believe, to write for Biden, to write in such a way that he can actually successfully deliver it.
It depends on your mindset. I tend to defend speechwriters for presidents of both parties.
Sure.
But this one was you have to be of the same mindset as your president. And this one is a pretty unattractive one.
Man. All right. Well, I really appreciate your insight into all this. Clark Judge, again, founder and managing director with the White House Writers Group, and, of course, a former speechwriter and a special assistant to both President Ronald Reagan and Vice President George Bush. You've seen it all, sir. Thank you, Clark. Good to talk to you today.
It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Really nice to have you. That's okay. Clark Judge today. And so there you go. A guy with a long history of writing speeches for presidents looking at this going, this is nuts. This is very unusual. So I'm not crazy. In other words, just want to confirm that this seemed crazy. It was a dark speech last night. And, one of the frustrating things about it is it started so damn late. I was watching. We're hanging out at Bourbon Boulevard, as you know, last night, preparing to watch the speech in the evening. And I keep looking at my watch and go, it's like half an hour. It's like almost 9:30, and this guy's not up to the lectern yet. How long is it going to take for him to get there? And he's old, of course. It's taking him a while to walk. But just getting to the building was a delay yesterday. And that is due in no small part to the anti-Israel blockade that was trying to shut down traffic in the Capitol yesterday. Which, by the way, if you shut down traffic for the State of the Union, if you get in the way of the President of the United States getting to the Capitol building, aren't you disrupting a congressional proceeding? Aren't you guilty of the thing that all the January 6 people are apparently guilty of, allegedly? What happened there? Has anyone been charged? There was a Gold Star father arrested in the gallery yesterday. He shouted out in the middle of Biden's speech, Abbey Gate, to remind the whole world of the Marine that he lost because of Joe Biden. That happened yesterday for real. Let me see. I've got the audio here of this gentleman yelling out. Here, Steve Nicoy. Yeah, Steve Nicoy. Here he is last night yelling out in the middle of the speech. Biden barrels along as if he didn't say anything.
America's safer today than when I took office. The year before I took office, murder rates went up 30%. 30% they went up. The biggest increase in history. It was then, through my American Rescue Plan, which every American voted against, I might add.
I heard Marines. I heard Abbey Gate said multiple times. Crystal clear what he was saying there in terms of the message he was trying to convey. That's Steve Nicoy. Now, he's the father of an American Marine, U.S. Marine, who was killed 2021. New York Times had the report on this last night. During the evacuation of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, he was arrested and charged with a misdemeanor last night for interrupting Biden during the State of the Union address, according to Capitol Police. Mr. Nicoy yelled, Abbey Gate, during the president's speech, a reference to the place where his son, Lance Corporal Kareem Nicoy, and 12 other troops were killed during the chaotic final days of the U.S. presence in Kabul. A statement from the Capitol Police said officers had warned Mr. Nicoy to stop, and when he did not, they removed him from the chamber. In the statement, officers said, quote, this is a routine charge on Capitol Hill. People who illegally demonstrate or disrupt Congress typically are released after they pay a $50 fine, so the misdemeanor charge is resolved without going to court, they say. Really? So people who demonstrate or disrupt Congress typically are released after they pay a $50 fine. That's apparently it, according to the Capitol Police source. Not if they get into the crosshairs of the Biden administration. That is not the fine that they pay. In fact, they'll spend years in prison for demonstrating or disrupting Congress, as we know now. We'll see. We'll see if the Biden administration puts this father in their crosshairs. It'd be very stupid to do that, I think. But they've done stupid things before. But you've got all of these anti-Israel people who were trying to block off traffic yesterday in D.C. And I was checking. I was like, okay, did anyone get arrested here? According to the Metropolitan Police Department, they did arrest one person who apparently revved his engine and yelled at the crowd yesterday. It wasn't the people who were doing the blockade. It was a guy who was mad at the blockade. Eyewitnesses said a man, this is ABC 7, said a man drove a white convertible near the crowd of protesters gathered along H Street. He then stopped the car and began yelling at the crowd. And, and so they had all these road closures that were caused because of the blockade, but it was just the guy who was screaming at the crowd who was arrested. I guess they said he was threatening them. He was probably upset that they were blocking him. That's what's happening. But all these guys disrupting Congress. It's just the father of the fallen Marine who gets arrested and charged, though, not the anti-Israel people. It's 5:51 now. By the way, I'm going to keep an eye on this whole TikTok saga. You saw earlier this week, Congress is trying to force a divestiture to get the Chinese Communist Party to stop running TikTok and destroying the minds of American young people everywhere. It's a good idea. Although, did you see Rand Paul, Donald Trump, and Elon Musk are all now standing up for TikTok and China keeping control of it? Don't like that. I disagree with that. I can't believe I disagree with all three of those people in particular, Rand Paul, Elon Musk, Donald Trump. Not often do I find myself in that position. Today I do. It happens. This is America. Hey, I do have an update for you. Laken Riley's mother has reacted to Joe Biden yesterday during the State of the Union, referring to her daughter as Lincoln, getting it completely wrong. Fox News with the report. This is during our show. Laken Riley's mother slammed President Biden on Friday for saying her daughter's name incorrectly during the State of the Union last night. The president referred to the 22-year-old Georgia nursing student as Lincoln rather than Laken in his speech. And here's the response from the mother. Quote, Biden does not even know my child's name. It's pathetic, she wrote. If you're going to say her name, even when forced to do so, at least say the right name. Laken's mother, Allison Phillips, writing this on Facebook this afternoon. She's upset about this. She had a conversation with Donald Trump recently. He spoke to the family and said very nice things about the conversations. He said that they are devastated beyond belief. But no conversation with Joe Biden. None for the Riley family. Hey, coming up here on WMAL, don't miss the great one, Mark Levin, up next.